born in Gisagara, here in Rwanda. That time it was Komine Kibirizi. That was in 1958. I was the fifth child of my parents. We eventually became 8, and then my father passed away. He was a refugee already in Burundi. But by then I had also lost my sight. Some of my siblings had to drop out of school because my father died before my mother could pick herself up and be able to continue educating the rest, the other young ones. I went to school in Kenya because I lost my sight in a missionary hospital in Burundi at Ibuye. And I went to Kenya for education. That's where I got all my education, from primary to university, after which I worked in Kenya for 10 years before coming back to Rwanda. So my education was very much according to the Kenyan system, that is 7 years primary, 6 years secondary, and 3 years university. I was in Thika School for the Blind, so it had to be a boarding school. Because I was taken by some Anglican missionaries, that time it was Church Missionary Society, the Rwanda Missions. That's where I lost my sight. And I believe they are the ones who took me to school in Kenya. There were 3 of us. There were 2 other Rwandan children with me. And it had to be a very competitive education because you can only go to secondary school if you have passed primary. I managed through sponsorship by charitable organizations. I think my sponsors in primary were the Christian Children's Fund. But when I got to secondary, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees sponsored me for my secondary and university education. In university, I studied sociology and government. But after completing my university, I worked for 2 years with the government in a government ministry. And then they realized that I was in a government ministry being a foreigner. So they decided the job I was holding did not require an expatriate. So there was no need for a foreigner to be in that job. So my contract had to be terminated and I got a teaching job. I was teaching for 6 years in a secondary school. It was in a province, in the central province, Nyeri district. I think today it is Nyeri County. So it was a school for girls, Kangubiri Girls High School. So that's where I taught. I was teaching, first I was teaching history and Christian religious education. But then there was a new subject called social education and ethics. And I was given 2 classes in social education and ethics. Then I had 2 classes in Christian religious education, and I had the finishing class, the last class of the old system where we had A-level. I was teaching them history. Then after that, when they left, I went completely into social education and ethics and Christian religious education. So after that, I got a job with the Kenya Union of the Blind. This is the organization of the blind, as the women's programs coordinator. Then when I realized that by 1996, I realized that, first of all, in 1994, we started the process of establishing the Rwanda Union of the Blind, because I managed to get somebody who could come to Rwanda and come back to Kenya. I could not come to Rwanda because I was holding UN travel document for refugees, so I could not enter Rwanda. So we got somebody who could come into Rwanda and out again, and he had asked us what we could do for blind people in Rwanda. So I brought up the idea that I had been having for a long time, starting an organization of the blind so that we will be able to address ourselves to the government and see if the government can support rehabilitation for blind people in Rwanda and also education. So that is how we got into education for blind people in Rwanda, because we managed to establish this organization. The work of establishing it started on the ground in 1994, but it was registered in 1995. Then I came to join it to be, when we started it, I was the Secretary General. This other man was the chairperson or president. His name is James Ndahiro. He is now a retired army officer. He lost his sight on the field, on the battlefield. So he had come to Kenya to learn Braille and for rehabilitation, and that's how we met. So we have been engaged now in advocacy for blind people and for people with disabilities to be included in society, and also to help them to accept themselves and support their own integration. That is, try to be part of society, not expect charity. That is our, we call it our maxim. That's what we want. We don't want to be seen as people who always expect charity. We want to be seen as part of society and get everything because it's our right, not because people are feeling sorry for us. So it has to be whatever the government is providing for everybody else, it must be provided for the people with disabilities as well, and according to their disabilities. Yes, education as a blind child at that time would have been difficult in a regular school, because nobody was thinking in terms of inclusion. So it was in a school for the blind. All materials were provided specifically for children who are blind. Unfortunately, though, our teachers were not trained to believe that a person who is blind can be completely independent. They believed and they expected that once you have learned Braille, you will be able to read and study and to excel in some subjects, not all. Because I remember in mathematics, when we reached the level where we were expected to be doing some geometry, in the Braille book, the Braille mathematics books, we were using a book called Highway Mathematics. And we started doing geometry when we got to, I think it was book 6. So we were not being expected to draw anything, even though there were some Braille drawing equipment. So it's more like just being made familiar with the Braille drawing equipment, being shown how to draw a circle, a rectangle, a triangle, a straight line, and then nobody will expect you to draw a figure. And nobody will expect you to, a lot of the figures would be omitted in that book, because those who were brailing the book assumed that such a drawing would be too difficult for a blind person. So it's like you are being tuned from very early that this is impossible for you. You are not allowed to try and be defeated, which I think is not quite right. But for the other subjects like health science, like geography theory, again here, we were not taught to read maps, and we were not being expected to try and draw a map. Although I know that I remember there was a book that we had in the library that was, the whole volume was entirely maps. I think the book was called Southern Continents. So it was in 3 volumes. The last volume, which is several chapters, was completely maps. It was there in the library, but nobody was going to help you to be able to try and find your way around those maps to read them and all that, because nobody thought you should be able to read maps. So the education was quite good. It was a very good school academically. But as a blind child, there were things that you would be told, this one is out for you. That was the same when I got to secondary school with biology. Practicals were out of the question for us. We were taught by a teacher who had lost part of his sight as a child. He went to school in the primary school for the blind, but then he got treatment and one eye completely cured. So he went to a sighted secondary school. Luckily, he was the one who was the deputy headmaster at our school and the biology teacher. So sometimes he would draw for us figures which had been indicated like those which should be left out for the blind students, because they will not be able to understand them. Then he realized that we were actually following and making much more sense when we have the drawings. So he even tried with doing experiments. And again, he realized that we only needed some help, like telling us the colors. When you add this, what color comes out? And then if you judge from the colors what it means. So for example, if you take a leaf and press it together using something, in our experiment we used razor blades. So you put a razor blade under the leaf and on top, hold it there with a paper clip for some time, for some days, and then boil it in a certain chemical, and you get where you had put the razor blades turns blue. So when somebody tells me that it has turned blue, I know there's starch. That leaf contains some starch. So he realized that actually it was possible to learn biology. I think our class was the only one that did biology practicals with only very slight alterations. But the Ministry of Education decided that because they had to do some alteration for us, then it means we are not doing exactly the same exam as the other students. And they removed the following year, the year after us, did not do the practicals. In fact, they changed the subject. Instead of biology, they did human biology. But this subject was not very popular. So only 2 schools in the whole country, our school and another school, did human biology. Again, the school dropped it. And for some time, they were doing biology theory, not practical. The school that I was in was Thika High School for the Blind. That was in 1975. That's when the only year that we did biology practicals. The year before us, they did only theory because the Ministry of Education did not believe that blind people could understand practicals. So like, you cannot be able to draw. You cannot be able, say, to identify what insect or to dissect a creature, say to dissect a frog. You cannot be able to understand a drawing if you are given a drawing or an experiment. The idea of helping us where we need help. So for example, one of the questions that we did in our practicals was a bulb that is placed above a beaker filled with water, and then you are told that in the bulb, it's a bulb on a long tube, and then it's just above some water in a beaker, and you are told that in this bulb there are some frogs. There weren't any frogs. I just assumed that there are some frogs, and one of the questions was, do you think the frogs will stay alive? So according to your knowledge, you should be able to answer the question. In our mocks, the tube was a glass tube. And the question was, how will these frogs be able to get water? Actually, the glass tube, which was touching the water inside the beaker, was the kind of glass that which can get the water to go up. So the water could go up the tube. Some people got the answer right, some got it wrong. But because we had been made to understand what we cannot be able to, like what you cannot be able to see, somebody can give you a description of it, and you should be able to understand according to the biology you learned what your answer should be. Well, actually, high school, it used to be in 2 parts, O level and A level. So I did not do biology in A level. I did literature, history, and Christian religious education. And then for A level, I had to go to a sighted school. The school for the blind at that time did not have the A level section. So I had to go to a sighted school. And then that is when I was introduced for the first time the challenges of being blind in a sighted world. So everything I got all the materials were in print. And there was no arrangement, there was no plan for someone to read to me. The only equipment that I had to assist me was a typewriter, my Perkins Braille, a typewriter, and a tape recorder, cassette recorder. I had to find my own cassette recorder. I had to think of what materials I need, and then I told the school was giving us the Perkins Brailles that we had been, the School for the Blind, that we had been using in the School for the Blind, and they would support us by providing us with Braille paper. So because I told them of the complications that I might experience, they also lent me a small typewriter because we had been learning typing in the School for the Blind. So I could type my answers to questions for the teachers to be able to mark. But I wrote my notes in Braille. And then I had to convince my classmates and other sighted students to read the print books to me so that I make notes. That way, I was able to keep up with the other students, and I passed my exam. So I went to university. In university, it was the same, with the added complication that I had to walk for 20 minutes from the hall of residence to the university. For someone who knows Nairobi, I can tell you that I had to walk from Mamlaka Road, cross Kenyatta Avenue, and then continue. Now I can't even remember which way I was going, but I know that I had to go around the big roundabout. We used to call it the Uhuru Highway roundabout. A number of highways that connect from that roundabout until I catch University Way, and then I walk along University Way to the gate of the university. It was a complicated route. Luckily, that was the first year of the UN decade for persons with disabilities. We managed to convince the university to provide transport for all students with disabilities. And that was my savior, because I had tried to walk that distance a number of times, and I had found that it would be very difficult to walk it alone. I needed somebody to guide me. But you cannot always be sure that you will get somebody to guide you who is not being paid. So when we got the vehicle, I was very happy, although at first one of the staff in the university told me that the vehicle was meant for people with physical disabilities because they had physical problems to walk to the university. So for me, I should be able to walk alone. So I had to go to higher authorities in the university to plead that I be allowed to use the transport. And I was eventually allowed. I started my university in 1980. I lost some years because at first I was not admitted because of not being a Kenyan, and without a government having given me a scholarship to go to the university. So this is a complication of being a refugee. So I had to go and try and get the UNHCR to sponsor me because I could not get the government loan in Kenya. So I lost 2 years. We lost a year in university our group, our cohort, because there was an attempted coup d'etat in 1982, and that time I was in second year. So we were suspended for almost a year. We were suspended for 7 months just before we did our exam, and then we had to come back to do the exam, and after that we lost another 5 months before they could decide whether those who had been part of the, they said the university students had participated in the coup d'etat. So they took some time to decide whether they were going to call us back. So eventually they did, and I completed my university in 1984. I should have completed in 83, but I completed in 84. And as I said, my best subject would have been literature. I had managed to get an offer for 311 in literature. That means in second and third year I do literature only. But I found that in second year literature I had 40 books to read. Some of them are plays, others were novels, poems, and then also some, I think they looked more like political books and sociological books. When you consider that I am having to beg people to read to me, and then I have so many books to read, and these books I must read them through, not just reading some chapters, reading them through, and then reading commentaries on those books. It's not just them. The amount of reading was impossible for me. I decided to take sociology, to major in sociology and government. I told you that I did 2 years as a social development officer in the government of Kenya, culture, the Ministry of Culture and Social Services. I was in social services. I was in this job being a foreigner. I think my colleagues or my superiors did not want a foreigner in this job. So the first problem I got was that I was not being assigned work. So I would be there, I would wait for work, and there's no work coming to me. So I tried to wonder, why is this happening like that? And instead I was moved to a training institute for persons with disabilities. It was called Industrial Rehabilitation Center, IRC. I went there for like 3 weeks, and it seemed like there was no work. I had no job description. And because I was a beginner, it's like I did not know what to ask for. I was just feeling idle. So I went back to the ministry, not having been called back. But this center was also part of the ministry, part of the vocational rehabilitation department. So I went back to the ministry and I went and told my superior, I don't see what I'm supposed to be doing at IRC. So I sat there for like 2 years, but in the last year I had a colleague and she had an assignment. She was new in the ministry. I told her the problem I was seeing, and she decided, okay, you can work with me. So she was given some assignments and we would work together. One of the assignments was to try and find out, it's like a research or a survey, to try and find out what kind of other course they could introduce at IRC. So we sat together and planned what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And then we started going to see the people that we wanted to interview. You know, like, so when she was giving her report, she indicated that we worked together. But then I also started wondering, other people that we got into the ministry together, this time I'm very naive. I don't realize that I am where I am not wanted. So the others had gone to there's a training center for people who are going into administration. And those who had joined the ministry with me had all gone through, and I hadn't. So I started wondering why I wasn't being invited to go for the training. And I think that is where it came about, that because I am a foreigner, I should leave the ministry. So I got my notice to leave the ministry. And as soon as I left, somebody who was working with me in the ministry told me that they took back all the files and put white out on my signatures. That is, they kind of like erased my signatures where I had done some work, where I had signed in any file. I don't know why. Anyway, I left the ministry and applied for teaching. I had started in December 84, and I left in 86, December 86. So I applied for teaching, and in 87, that's when I went into teaching in Kangubiri. So I was teaching as an untrained teacher because my training was not in teaching. But I did well, because the class that I had brought from Form 1 to Form 4 in Christian religious education, in the year that they did their exam, there were 2 classes. They got the highest they have ever got in Christian religious and education in the school. So I can say that I did well in teaching. When I came to Rwanda in 1996, actually I had visited, was it twice or 3 times? There were 2 different things that were happening at the same time. My family had returned from Burundi and come back to Rwanda. They were returning refugees. So when I came to visit, we established the Rwanda Union of the Blind in 1994, August. That's when we could say we now had an organization which we were trying to register in Rwanda. So I came in December 1994, first because I had learned that my family were in Rwanda, and I knew I had got somebody who could bring me to them. And also, at the same time, to come and visit the organization that we had established. So I did that in December 1994. We left when we had decided that now we have started the process of registering this organization that we had established. And I went back to Kenya. I came back in 1995 because my sister had passed away. So I was coming to visit my mother and the children that my sister had left. But I also took the opportunity to visit the organization that we had established and see what was going on. So when I came, I realized that the organization had been established, had been registered, it had appeared in the official gazette. I came in May, it had appeared in the official gazette in March. So we were going to start the task of getting the first blind students to do the national exam for completing primary education. They had been going to school, a very small number, going to school at Gatagara, HVP Gatagara in Nyanza. That time it was Community Goma. And they would do 6 years of primary education, and that was it. Something had started where the school would select, or is it the brothers of charity, would select the brightest, 2 or 3, sometimes 1, in a year, and train them in massage. So they would be, they call it kinesiotherapy. But you know, kinesiotherapy is a diploma course. You must have done 6 years of secondary education with biology and chemistry. So that's why I say they trained them in massage. With no exams to prove that they have passed, because there were no national exams in that course. And then the ones they had trained, they would help them to find jobs. When we came, there were 2 working at Gatagara. They told me that there had been 6, but I think the other 4 had died in the genocide. Then we decided that it will not be just 1 or 2. It should be all blind students being given a chance to get secondary education. They must do the primary leaving exam. They must do the Exeter. So we tried to get the government to give them this chance. We talked about it with the people. We had put some people in an office. My colleague had more influence, having been an army officer, was a lieutenant by then. Or he was still an army officer, he was still a lieutenant. He never retired as a result of disability. So he could manage to get to government officials and show them that actually the way the government had been doing it together with the Catholic Church was not right. They should get blind students to sit the exam. So I left this spirit, having been started with the people who were working in the office and being paid by the ministry or by ministries as people who were forwarded to the organization. And I went back to Kenya. But when I got to Kenya, I decided, okay, I'm going to finish this year and then go back to Rwanda. Because I was the first women's programs coordinator in the country, in the Kenya Union of the Blind. I had set my agenda for 2 years, and now I didn't want to go and leave it only halfway. So I decided I was going to do as much as I could within that year and then come back to Rwanda. to be with my family, with my mother and my sister's children. But then that meant that I could also support the organization that we had started. So in 1996, March, that is when I came. By the time I came, I had been promised that the Ministry of Education would hire me and forward me to the Rwanda Union of the Blind. When I came, that has changed. Meanwhile, the first group of blind students had done the national exam in December 1995. So that was the first breakthrough. They had done the exam, and they had passed. But no secondary school would take them. And the government did not do anything about the fact that no secondary school was admitting them. So they went back home. So I came, that was the first thing I was going to tackle. And when I returned to Kenya, I registered the Rwanda Union of the Blind with the World Blind Union and with the African Union of the Blind. So now we are affiliated to those two organizations. So I came back in March and I started trying to see ministries to see whether they could make it possible for learners with visual impairment to go to school, secondary school. But it was a very uphill task. Nobody wanted to hear that. Where will you get the materials? Where will you get the equipment? What about the teachers who are not trained to teach blind students? You should instead, in fact, push Gatagara to establish a secondary school. But Gatagara did not want to establish a secondary school. They did not think there was any point having so many blind people completing secondary because they are not going to get jobs. Anyway, we continued. In 1996, the second cohort sat the exams. Out of 11, 8 passed. The others were very nearly, like the pass mark was 52. The lowest of the ones who were left out was 49. So eventually they lowered the pass mark to 47 and all the 11 qualified to be in secondary school. We managed to get Groupe Scolaire de Gahini to admit the first 8. No, in fact, they admitted 10 to start with, because they had also to admit some of the ones who had not gone to secondary school in the year before. Many of them we could not trace them, but the 2 that we could trace joined the other 8. But then the other 3 also finally, who had not made it at first, also finally came. So it was quite a big group of blind students in one school and one class, 1 year. Well, it was not exactly one class because at Gahini it was 4 streams and the headmaster distributed them across the 4 streams. So the first group joined secondary school in 1997. And there was no plan. I mean, nobody knew what to do. And even when we tried to say what can be done, nobody was willing to do it. But it was, in fact, also a difficult time because this is when the country was trying to pick itself up after the genocide against the Tutsis and the civil war. So it was not an easy time, but we struggled. And the students also struggled because they were in school without textbooks. And the teachers strongly believed that they cannot do mathematics and they cannot do sciences. So we decided to sort of like accept it that way for now, just because we are just starting. So at Gahini, we agreed that when they finish O-level, they will do arts in A-level. So that was how they started. Now they do even history, education, and geography. I don't know, and languages. First, when we started, I think we had been told that because much of the materials they were using had been looted during the Civil War, they were not going to admit blind students anymore. They were just going to support those who were there to complete primary, and then that will be it. So what we decided in RUB was we were going to refer blind people, blind children, whom we found when we are looking for blind people, to Gatagara, hoping that when they see blind children coming, they will not send them away. And that is what happened. They kept them. But also, we were lucky in 1997 to be able to get a chance. I talked with somebody that I had met here in Kigali, a Dutch woman. She's no longer alive by now, who had worked with organizations of persons with disabilities in Holland quite a lot. So she came to see us in our office to see whether she could volunteer to help. Sometimes she came and she would volunteer. She would help us with some work. And then she said, why don't you let us get these people, some people, to Holland and show them what blind people do and what other organizations of persons with disabilities do. So I said that would be very helpful. She approached the embassy. The embassy agreed to sponsor the trip. So 4 of us went to Holland for the trip. And we visited quite a number of institutions because I wanted them to see that it is normal for blind people to be in school, to receive an education, and when they have received an education, they get employed. It is even possible because most people were saying that to have thought of putting blind people in Gahini was wrong. It was torturous for the blind people, and it was distracting the other students. And I wanted them to see that it is possible to have blind students in a sighted school setting. So we planned this with my friend. She was called Marike Rimsma. So we planned this trip, and she organized for us quite a number of visits just to prove that. And I think we had somebody from the Ministry of Education, the headmaster of Gahini, myself, and the chairperson of RUB that time, it was James Ndahiro. So, well, he was also finding a lot of this very new, the president of RUB, because he had only just lost his sight. So to him it was also very new. It was also something to encourage him, to show him that it's not the end of life now that he is blind. Life continues. There is a lot that hasn't happened yet in inclusion of persons with disabilities or persons with visual impairment, especially persons with sensory impairments. That is visual impairment, hearing impairment, and those who have a combination of both. That is those who are deaf-blind. Also for people who have mental disabilities, like for example, those who have Down syndrome, those who have autism, and those who have other types of intellectual disabilities, including those who have had mental illnesses that do not completely cure, that leave them with some neurotic impairments, which makes it difficult for them to cope. But it doesn't make it impossible. It only makes it difficult. For example, for a child with Down syndrome, they take longer to understand what you are teaching them, what you want to teach them, especially when it is theory. But when it is practical work, they master it quite well. It might take a little longer, but they master practical work very well. The same with some varying degrees of autism. They may find it difficult to, like say, understand why people behave the way they are behaving. They might find it difficult to make friends. Or in their understanding, they make friends. But very often for someone with autism, they want you to be friends on their terms. They will not understand you wanting to make them, like accept your terms. When you understand these things, a lot of people with autism can lead reasonably normal lives. Again, people with intellectual, well, not intellectual, but mental illnesses, what makes it very difficult for them is when people make fun of them, when people are, like violent with them, because if you are violent with somebody with a mental illness, the person also becomes violent. But otherwise, when they are feeling better, they can lead a reasonably normal life, or when they are taking their medication properly. I believe the schools that are there for learners with intellectual disabilities are usually faith-based or being supported by organizations or civil society organizations. And they have projects or programs that are supporting them. It's not entirely the government. The government may give some support, some assistance, but it's not the government doing it. Although the government has already signed the special needs and inclusive education policy, they prepared it because the government has already signed the UNCRPD, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and therefore they put in place the special needs and inclusive education policy, but implementing it is still a problem because the government has not done enough. For example, learners with visual impairment in mainstream schools, many of them still do not have the equipment or materials to help them to keep up with the other students, unless, or with the other pupils, unless an organization is found to provide them with the materials. Sometimes even when we are releasing so many teachers with who have trained in special needs and inclusive education, you will find that they are being deployed to schools without finding out whether there is a child who needs such a teacher. And then in a school where such a child is, such a teacher is not there. Not every teacher is being trained in special needs and inclusive education. So, and then the materials. So, for example, when the government started providing this program, like one laptop per child, the laptops that they brought are not JAWS compatible. So you cannot use the screen reader programs on those laptops. And nothing was done to make it possible for learners with visual impairment to get a laptop until the Rwanda Union of the Blind, with the help of Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Africa, came up with the idea of introducing the Orbit reader. The government has accepted that the Orbit reader can replace the laptop that the other students get. But so far as I know, no Orbit readers have been provided by the government. Some Orbit readers are in schools, but either they have been provided, most of them have been provided by the Rwanda Union of the Blind through support from Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Africa, and a few have been provided by electronic books. It's called e-kitabu. So, yeah, we still need the government to do more. My retirement has already started. I'm still going to work because I'm still organizing my handover. But I am not on the payroll. I'm already retired. What I would like to see is to see the government planning for all citizens. Our mission in the Rwanda Union of the Blind is to work towards the improvement of the lives of persons with visual impairment, to bring them to the same level as the conditions of our sighted peers, the conditions of all other citizens. And we want to work towards supporting the blind and partially sighted people through education and rehabilitation, to help them to be able to reintegrate themselves into society and have the same rights as all other people in society, be able to live and participate in life the same as other citizens. This can only happen if all plans take into consideration the fact that some people are blind, some are deaf-blind, some are deaf, some have different types of intellectual disabilities, different types of physical disabilities, and we should be able to plan for all of them. We should be able to make sure that all of them are living in Rwanda as Rwandans and getting whatever services they need because it's their right, not because they have been lucky to be noticed by a certain church or by a certain organizations, but because they can go to the, say for example, to the cell office or to the sector office and report that they need this, and the sector will find it. I am still a member of the Rwanda Union of the Blind, so I am sure there will be some work for me to do as the founder member of the organization. But I guess I will also, I haven't decided what I'm going to do, but I'll find something to do. I'm not old enough yet to stay at home all day. I would find that very boring. My message for Rwanda, for the government, I want to tell them that when you don't cater for people with disabilities, you are losing a lot of potential. You are losing the work of people who could have done so many wonderful things in the country. The work of so many thinkers, people with very great mental capacity. So this is something that the government must make sure that they don't lose. I would also like to tell family members of people with disabilities, trying to hide your person with a disability in the bedroom and leaving them out in society, you are making life very miserable for that person and also for yourself, because you are living in denial. You are trying to deny that you have a person who has an impairment or some disability, and you are making this person to live a very unhappy life, feeling unable, feeling undesirable, or feeling like they are being a burden. Yet this person can be the person who is going to support the family in very difficult times. You must make sure, first of all, stop feeling guilty, because if that person has an impairment, anybody can have an impairment. Anybody can acquire a disability, and this person will want to continue with life. So stop making your loved one miserable. They need to go out with a family. They need to participate in family life. They need to go to school. They need to be employed. They need to do everything that everybody else is doing. And for the people with disabilities, stop thinking that life has ended because you have acquired a disability. If you acquire it when you are older, because you are the one who is making yourself miserable. Also, stop expecting charity. Work for what you want to get. When you expect charity, you will get what nobody else wants, or you will get the least. You will be considered last. So you must work for what you want. Ask for help when you need it. Ask for the kind of help that you really need. But then continue living. I think this is what I want to tell everybody.